Thank you very much, Robin. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm indebted to Virginia Commonwealth University for getting involved in action learning, I guess about 20 years ago. I became a professor at George Washington University in our executive doctoral program. And the first course I was asked to teach was a course called Action Learning. And I did not know what action learning was, but the previous professor who had taught it had retired. I'm the new professor. They asked me to take the course. And they gave me one of the books, ABCs of Action Learning by Reg Revens, and a syllabus. And they said, go for it. Fortunately, I knew Lex Dilworth at the time. And I said, Lex, I know you have a background in action learning. What should I do? And he gave me some advice for teaching that course that particular semester. And then in the summer, that particular summer of 1995, there was a conference in London, in which I know one or two people here actually were attending, in which I got an opportunity to meet with Reg Revens and all the various pioneers in action learning. And it became, for me, the passion of my life. For the past 20 years, action learning has been something that I believe very strongly in. You see my passion for it. I think it can not only help us learn in an academic sense, but it's a way of changing the world. And so I'm going to take about an hour and 15 minutes or so to give you some of the principles and theories behind action learning. We'll have time for questions, and certainly after the event is over, I'll be more than pleased to answer any individual questions you have. Okay, so with that, let's begin. Many of you know what action learning is, but I'm working with the fact that some people may be very familiar with it and some may be new to it. But very simply described, action learning is a process in which a group of people learn while they act. And so the group is given a difficult problem. The more complex it is, the more challenging it is, the more action learning is the appropriate process. And every time the group meets, and throughout the meeting they get smarter. They learn how to solve problems together. They become more creative. Every moment they're together, they're improving their capability and applying it immediately. And the power of an action learning group perhaps could be summarized by comparing them to typical problem-solving groups. Most problem-solving groups don't learn. They're there to solve the problem. And so when the group comes together, let's say they know how to add by 2. And so if the problem is an easy problem of getting to the number 100, and a group learns that 2 plus 2 is 4, plus 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8, and they can eventually get to 100. But what if the problem is 1 trillion? And the problems that organizations face today are $1 trillion problems. Very complex. Global implications. Have to be done very quickly. Have to always be innovative. Have to make quantum improvements in what they do. And they can only add by 2. How long does it take a problem-solving group to solve a 1 trillion problem when they're going to only add by 2? Wow. Over 30 years. Over 30 years. Now what if this group learned while it was working on the problem? It got smarter and smarter. Used all of its resources and ideas and the thinking and values and perspectives of every member of the group. There's 6 or 7 or 8 people in the group. And they learn how to multiply by 2. And action learning groups learn how to multiply. How long would it take an action learning group to reach 1 trillion if you could multiply by 2 rather than just add by 2?
10 minutes.
Pardon?
10 minutes. Less
than 30 minutes. Depending on quick rate. So you go from 30 years to 30 minutes because of the power of learning. And in my experience with action learning groups with organizations such as Microsoft or Boeing or Samsung, these folks have said we get more done in 2 hours using action learning than we do 2 months in our typical problem solving. So action learning is the ability of getting the power of learning. And learning occurs naturally. just like it occurred when you were 1 and 2 years of age. We all know the most powerful learning years of our lives are the first 2 years of life, because everyone in the world uses action learning to learn how to walk, how to talk. Because action learning is you act your way into learning. None of us stop our 1-year-old and say, hold on, let me give you a little lesson on how to walk, a little lesson on how to talk. Every time they make a movement or a sound, they use action learning, the reflective questioning process, and they can speak 6 or 7 languages by the age of 2. And they can do all kinds of physically, difficult things by the age of 2 because they act their way to learning. So all of us are action learners. And that's the most powerful way, and it's the only way to develop skills. And then around the age of 2.5 or 3, this is a global phenomenon, we stop action learning. Why? Well, we stop asking questions. Because when we're a few months old, our subconscious always says, how can I improve my sound or my movement? And as soon as a child learns how to speak verbally in an intelligible way, what do? They ask questions, right? They love to ask questions because that's been the joy of their life. That's how they learned. And then what do parents say? Stop asking so many questions. You're driving me crazy. I don't have time. You're embarrassing me. And so children worldwide learn not to ask questions. And they stop learning. And they go to the schools. And if they do ask some questions, they get embarrassed pretty quickly by a teacher or a fellow classmate. And they stop asking questions. Or they go to the workplace or university. The university says, we've got the answers. Just take the notes. Don't ask questions. And so we've lost that ability to action learn. Now, I'm a grandparent. I have 9 grandchildren. And my most important role in life is to undo the damage that my children do to my grandchildren. And so I tell my grandchildren, you can ask Grandpa any question. I love questions. And they all love to come to Grandpa because they love questions. Around their parents, teacher, they can't, but ask Grandpa anything. And children ask great questions. That's why they learn so much. They say, why is your beard white? They're not embarrassed. Why don't the clouds fall? They see the whole system. So action learning is really the effort of bringing what is natural, but making it much more powerful because it's a group rather than individuals. So action learning is used by organizations for many purposes. The more difficult the problem is, the more complex the problem, the more likely that only an action learning group can figure it out and come up with a breakthrough strategy. You want to build great teams, I can take any group of people in the world, 5 or 6 people who work together for 10 years and hate each other, or have never met each other. And within 60 minutes, I always have a high-performing team that's enjoying working with each other. That's the power. And if I want to change an organization to become a learning organization, I bring in action learning projects. And if I want to develop leadership skills, I know that action learning is the only way to develop leadership skills. There's no other way. I can get theory, I can do case studies, but only through action learning do I develop leadership skills. So, as Robin indicated, I've been working with organizations everywhere in the world, companies that have 300,000 employees to organizations with 5 or 10. Public institutions, nonprofits, in every part of the world. It works just the same, just as effectively. People say, well, Koreans are different. They have more hierarchy. It won't work there. Works just as well in Korea as in Germany and Brazil. Because all of us are action learners. Only action learning groups can understand and solve problems. And all leadership, no matter what part of the world you are, leadership, there's some certain elements that make leaders great. and help them solve problems. Because what important the role of leaders is to help solve the problems of the organization, hopefully by helping improve the quality of learning of the people around them. So these are some of the organizations that I've worked with over the last few years using action learning. So I'm going to give you a kind of a quick overview of what are the elements of action learning that I have worked on for the past 20 years to try to make it as powerful as I could and as simple as I could. Because I strive to do what Einstein did, is that, he had a very simple formula. And he said that unless you can make it simple, you really don't understand it. But I discovered through research, experience, testing out with students, having them do research, trying it in all parts of the world, that if I had 6 elements present, I could make it work every time. Because it's built upon physical sciences as well as social sciences. And there's so many theories and disciplines, you get them all in place, you've got the conditions that will always result in a creative problem solving, result in a great team, result in leadership development and organizational change. So the first thing is you have to have a problem. A lot of us in life, the term problem, our mindset is that's something to be avoided. But problems is what give life meaning. It's the only way we learn. And the more urgent a problem is, the more we learn, and the more we have to take action. So when I go into an organization, I say, give me your toughest problem. Most critical, urgent, complex, you haven't been able to figure it out. And we'll come up with a great strategy. The second component is that you have a group of people working on this. Although I can individually do action learning with you as I interact, and I see the response of the audience, and I reflect, and how can I make this more exciting, or I do a performance appraisal with someone. I could do action learning at an individual level, or a pair level, but it's most powerful when you get 5, 6, 7, 8 people who think differently, who see the world differently, who have different perspectives, different questions, because they're going to be much more creative. One of the things we discovered from action learning is that the more complex a problem is, the less valuable is expertise, and the more valuable is diversity. You cannot solve a difficult problem with expertise or from within. You've got to think outside the box. And so, action learning, we deliberately seek people who are from outside the organization or know nothing about this technical area. And you might say to yourself, well, it's going to take a long time to get them up to speed. That's why we don't want those outsiders. Or they're going to cause different perspectives and we're going to have some conflict. In action learning, within 10 or 15 minutes, I'll have them fully involved. High performing, asking questions. They don't have to have any answers, they just have to have the questions. The third component of action learning is that in action learning, we work differently in an action learning problem-solving group than any other problem-solving group. Right now, when you have a problem, you have a group of people working a problem, what do? You're a member of the group, you're given a problem, you've got some ideas. What's the first thing you do? You start offering an idea, saying, here's what I think the problem is, or here's a strategy, or here's something I think that would work. And someone else would say, that's a great idea, let's do it, or disagree, and you have all kinds of differences, debates, or too quickly collude into something that's solving the wrong problem very effectively. So that's the typical way. When we solve a problem, we give our best ideas and try to persuade others to buy into our strategy, right? Action learning is just the opposite. What's the opposite? You're working on a problem. Typical way is to try to persuade others to understand and solve the problem. And I say, no, action learning uses just the opposite. What's the opposite? Pardon? Right. You spend your energy, instead of trying to convince other people to buy your ideas, you spend your energy getting them to share their ideas. So instead of saying, well, here's what I think will work, or here's a strategy, no, I spend all my energy saying, what do you think? we should do. What's your experience? It's just the opposite. So a way of describing it, has anyone here been to Japan or China or Korea, some place like that? Okay. Let's say you go to a restaurant or to a pub, and the waiter or waitress comes and pours everybody their cup of tea or their glass of beer. Now in the United States, if I'm here in Richmond, and I go to a pub with a few of my buddies, and the waiter comes, fills our glass, puts the pitcher in the middle of the table. How do I get my glass filled? I grab the pitcher and fill my own glass. Now what would you do in Japan or Korea or China? How do you get your glass filled?
Fills everyone else's.
Everybody's watching each other's glass. It never gets close, or a cup of tea. I've never had my glass of beer or cup of tea less than half full because someone is pouring. Because the focus is how can I get your cup filled rather than how do I fill my own cup. And so that looking at what other people can offer changes how we work. It's a totally different way of working. But we tend to hear what we ask for. We tend to deflect, reject, filter what we don't ask for. So when I offer strategies, your automatic, universal human response is to deflect, reject, or filter. But when I ask, what's your idea? Then we tend to hear what we ask for. But there's many other benefits for the question. So the way action learning groups work is through questions. Because questions are the way to generate creativity. We're looking for a great strategy, right? Can you get a great idea without a question? Has any invention in the history of the world been created without the question of the inventor, a question no one had asked before? Einstein had the question E equals mc squared for many months in his mind, but he had the question. He knew he had the, once you get to the great question, you're going to get the great strategies. But questions, if you're trying to get a breakthrough idea to solve this difficult problem, or even a simple problem, to get it done quicker and faster and better, only questions generate creativity. Because your brain operates very differently. When you get a question in your brain, the synapses open. It's a different way of, you can't help but think differently from a question. But questions keep us focused, and they help develop our leadership skills. The fourth component of an action learning group is that everyone in the group is expected to take action during every session and between this session and next session. The problem a group may get might be a 2-month problem, and they meet 6 times for a half a day, every other week. Or it could be a crisis and they have to solve it that morning. But in action learning, at the end of every session, everybody's got to take action. So there's an accountability, expectation. When you come back for session 2, what action did you take? What did you learn from that? Where are we now as a group? So you have to have action. Because unless there's action, there's not a commitment to it, but we learn from the actions. We learn and develop and improve during the session, but if we're taking actions between sessions and ask questions about it, we learn as well. So there has to be action. Most of the time we're in groups. I know the non-action learning groups I'm a part of, the only action is when's the next meeting? And the group sometimes can't even get that action. And they have to do some Google or Doodle or whatever it is. It takes another 4 or 5 hours getting everybody into the same place. The fifth component is that in an action learning group you are there for 2 purposes. You're there to solve the problem. And that's similar to any problem-solving group to solve a problem. But in action learning, before you arrive or the first 5 minutes after you arrive, you are told that we have 2 purposes here. One is to solve this problem, looking for innovative breakthrough strategy. And 2, each of you have to learn. Everyone in the group has to be a learner. Everyone has to be a leader. And therefore you have to learn how to be a leader and develop leadership skills during this session. You have to learn how to work as a team. Solving the problem may be worth $100,000 to the organization. But if we can develop 5 leaders that will be with that company for 5 or 10 or 15 years. That may be worth millions to the organization. Plus the skills and ideas and strategies we use to solve this problem, we can apply and adapt to other problems. And so whatever we do and learn here, we apply it throughout the organization. So in action learning, we're there to learn. Everybody's accountable for learning. And you get feedback on your learning. And you're going to talk about how you're going to apply that learning, not only in this group, but in the organization. And the sixth component of action learning is that one member of the group is assigned the responsibility for learning. The other 6 or 7 members, they're focused on coming up with great actions, strategies. But one person in the group is the action learning coach who's responsible that the group learns. Because what happens if you don't have someone responsible for learning? You're working on an urgent problem. And you say at the beginning, well, we got to be sure we take a little bit of time at the end so we can see how we can improve and so forth. What happens when the urgency of the action meets the importance of the learning? Learning never occurs. I've been in hundreds of groups, thousands of groups, and all of you have. And many of your groups say, well, we should take a little bit of time to learn, to improve next time we meet. But we're parts of groups that have met for 10 years. And they're more dysfunctional today than they were 10 years ago. An action learning group gets smarter every time it meets, faster and more enjoyable, because they have a person responsible for the learning and has power to manage the time so we get both learning and action in the agreed upon time we have. We have 60 minutes. Okay, at the end of the 60 minutes we're going to have actions for everybody. Everybody's going to have to reflect on their learning and apply it. So those are the 6 components. Now, I say normally I try to do a demonstration, but we won't have time for it today. But if you can go on YouTube and see some examples. Now, because questions are so important, they do so many things, and because the power of the coach is so important, I created 2 ground rules. So when a group gets together, after I say we're here to work on an urgent problem here at VCU, and we're going to use a process called action learning, which means we'll be both coming up with some great ideas, but we're also going to be learning as a team and as individuals. There's one ground rule. Statements can be made only in response to questions. Anyone can ask anybody a question at any point. But you cannot play the game unless you are either asking a question or answering questions on the floor. A question might generate 10, 20, 30 minutes of responses. It's a great question, keeps everybody focused. Or it's a great question, no one can respond to it because they never thought of it before. Have to check out the assumptions. Or they don't have the information available in the group. So statements can be made only in response to questions. That's the ground rule. And I can assure you I could take any group in which you're presently a member of. And if you would instigate or institute this particular ground rule, you would see that group transform in front of your eyes. Because they have to slow down, they have to start listening much better, they get more creative, they get to appreciate each other more. It was an insight I had about 10 years ago. I said, and people said, that's amazing what happens. Any group, new group, old group, that's a powerful ground rule. And I had to create power for the coach. So the coach has power to intervene whenever he or she sees an opportunity to make this a great multiplying group. Help them function well together. Handle any kind of dysfunctions that might occur. So how is action learning different from other groups? Again, some of you have experienced action learning, so you know it, but I'm kind of giving you the picture of it. But hopefully you see some of the unique differences. As I said, one thing is that action learning groups recognize they have to learn. As a matter of fact, the more you learn, the faster and better your actions. And that learning is as important, if not more important, than the action. But it occurs naturally. You're learning as you're going through it. Just like the child doesn't stop and get a lecture on how to walk and talk. It just learns through the reflective process caused by the action learning method and the coach. A second difference is that the group is given power. This is not a group that many organizations say, well, here's a task project, work on it. You know, if it's a good idea, we might buy it, or sometimes a good idea, we still don't buy it. Action learning groups know that they have power. I never allow an action learning group to be given a problem unless the problem presenter has committed him or herself to taking actions. And he or she's never getting any better ideas than this group is going to come up with because of the process. But they have to have power. And that makes it different from most of our groups where you don't feel like you have any impact in what you do. Third is that membership is not reserved just to experts. You deliberately try to find people who are not experts, who think differently. Because let's say you've got a marketing problem. And typically you've got a marketing problem, who do you have work on it? Marketing people. And you only get so far because marketing people have a way of thinking. That's built their competencies. So you bring an engineer in there. An engineer thinks differently than a marketing person. Engineers ask questions from an engineering perspective rather than a marketing perspective. And you don't have to have the answers to be beneficial to the group. You have to raise questions that get the group to see things they did not see before. And so many a time where someone asked a question, the group said, wow, that's a great idea. The person didn't even realize that was creating an idea. But they asked a question that engineers always ask, or marketing people always ask, or HR people ask. But you only can solve problems in a complex way. You have to understand the whole system. It uses, complexity systems and chaos in a very positive way. And so you want people with different perspectives. Fourth is that questions, we focus on questions. The greater the questions, the greater the actions. The greater the questions, the greater the learning. That's the focus. Initially, people are a little bit stumbling with questions. They probably haven't asked a good, great question in the workplace for 40 years. So it's a little hard. But it's like if let's say you learn how to ride a bike. And you rode a bike every day until you were 10 years of age. And then you didn't ride it for 20 years. And you were given the bike again. How long do you think it'd take you to get really pretty comfortable with that bike? 20, 30 minutes, right? Because all of us, by nature, are great questioners. You just need a little bit of time to get back into it. Fifth difference is that you have a learning coach. There's no other problem-solving groups that have a learning coach. We have groups of facilitators and advisors and experts and so forth. But no other group has an action learning coach whose role is to get great ideas, great power to the group, and great learning. And a sixth difference is that you always, when you examine the problem, you develop strategies, develop leadership skills, you always do it from a systems perspective. Because unless you use systems, you cannot solve a problem. Unless you use systems, you cannot develop a leadership skill or work as a team. So questions from different perspectives always leads to systems thinking, which is critical for survival at the organizational level, certainly. Okay, so let me go through each of the 6 components, talk about the benefits, and then we are ready for some questions. Again, the first element is to have a problem. Some of us might want to use the term challenge, goal. The reason I like the word problem is it gives a sense of urgency. If you've got a problem, you don't solve it. We got a challenge or a goal, and you don't get to it, life goes on. But you got a problem that's driving you crazy, or the organization's survival depends on it. It's a little more urgency. So problems give urgency. Goals give inspiration. Excellent analysis works between the two. But unless there's urgency, people don't learn and they don't take action. So the problem, it has to be something we don't use case studies. Because case studies are not problems. They're imaginary problems. And if we don't succeed, so what? But you got a real problem in the organization, don't succeed. Organization or people or clients suffer. And I said the more difficult the problem, more complex, more likely only action learning groups can solve it, and the better leadership skills, group skills, creativity skills emerge. So, examples of problems for action learning. I said I've worked on billion-dollar projects. We had 3 months to work on. Crises in which we had less than 2 hours to work on. Anything that's a problem. And we make a distinction in action learning between a problem and a puzzle. A puzzle, there's a single right answer. A Sudoku puzzle or a crossword puzzle or some technical problem, there's a single right answer. You don't need diversity in creative thinking. You need an expert to solve a puzzle. But a problem has multiple potential strategies to solve it. And probably a strategy that no one has ever thought of before or done before, because each problem has its own uniqueness because of the people, the organization, the environment, and so forth. So these are examples of problems that could work on, but you can't start an action learning project without a problem. Second, you have 4 to 8 people working on a problem. Ideally, people from within the problem, some responsibility, some technical expertise, and so forth, but ideally also people from outside the organization. When you're doing a marketing problem, wouldn't it be good to bring one of your potential buyers or consumers? If you're working on a dealer or supplier problem, if you're trying to design a course, wouldn't it be good to have maybe a student involved in it? Or someone who's a person who uses the student's capability when they graduate. So you try to have diversity, no more than 4 to 8. You might say, well, what's this magic 8? Well, have any of you worked in a group of 10 or 12 or 15 people to solve a problem in which you had to solve it as a group and take action as a group? Everybody, right? We all been. That's part of organizational life for political, social, economic, all kinds of reasons we have these groups of 10, 12, 14. So all of us have been in such groups. Has anyone been in a successful group of 10, 12, 15 people? All those resources and ideas, boy, you should be able to solve the problem even better, right? Never happens. Why not? Why can't 12 people solve a problem better than 6? They have more experience, there's diversity. Why can't they? We all have experiences. We can't do it. No one raised their hand saying, yeah, I got a group of 12 and doesn't happen. Why not? Too complex. Too much complexity with 12 people. You say, well, what's the difference between 8 people and 9 people? Just one more person. But how many more interdynamic relationships can occur between 9 people and 8 people in a group? 1 on 2, 2 on 7 versus 1 on 3 and 2 on 6 or whatever. How many more interactions are possible in a group of 9 people over 8? Thousands. And when you're solving a problem, everybody has to have airtime. You all have to be fully engaged throughout. You can't be fully engaged. So what happens to larger groups when they solve a problem? At some point, some people drift away, and a core of 5 or 6 people end up doing it, and the other people just accept it, or they never get the problem solved because everybody, for political, reasons, got to stay involved, and it can't be done. There's no trust of. So when I have an organization say we got 12 people, I say let's have 2 great problems. You're never going to have all the knowledge, all the passion, all the power in that group anyway. You're always going to need information between sessions. I could have 30 people, we won't have all the information we might need. We don't know what information we're going to need. But the 6 or 7 of us can figure out what we need. In between sessions, we can go and get the knowledge we need, or the power, or the passion that we need. So,
is that something you figured out over time, like trial and error?
Well, this was understood long before I got involved in group dynamics. That 8 kind of, and we all have 5 to 6 is the group size at almost everywhere around the world. We want everybody engaged. Now, groups in which you're just giving information to, where you're not problem solving, doesn't make a difference what size. I can speak to 500 people. Or I got a problem, or we got a performance appraisal, you're assuming it's just only going to be the 2 of us. But if we've got to solve a problem, then 4 to 8 is the number. Well, at least 4 because it gives you some creativity, some synergy, some challenging, and so forth. So, now, for an action learning group to work, every individual in the group has to behave in a certain way. Everybody in the group has to be committed to working on the problem. Everyone has to be listening to each other and asking good questions of each other. They have to be supportive. They have to be concerned what's best for this group project rather than what's best for me. Respectful, constructive. And you might say to yourself, yeah, I could see if I were in a group where everybody behaved that way, the group would be successful in terms of enjoying the process, getting some good ideas, getting smarter as a group. But I've never been in such a group. Do they exist? The answer is, unless there's an action learning group, they don't. They try and they get close, but an action learning group, every group, and I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of action learning groups over the last 15 years. And once I kind of put this model together and the ground rules, I've never had a single group in which every member of the group behaved this way. Now, how is that possible? The Koreans, Brazilians, obnoxious people, nice people, older, younger, males, females, they all behave this way. Why? The culture. We behave according to the culture we're in. And to demonstrate, let's say we have 50 people here in the room. And if we all were to go to a church, do you think that we'd have similar behavior among all of us, being somewhat prayerful, respectful? And then the same 50 people, 60 people, we leave the church and we go to a VCU basketball game. And the team is scoring and winning. Do you think everybody here will be jumping and cheering? Let's assume we're all good VCU fans. The same people who were quiet and prayerful in the church environment are jumping and shouting. Just the opposite. Same people, but a different environment. The culture encourages, demands. If you were sitting there praying, no, sometimes praying we win the game. But if you're in the church shouting and jumping, people say, hey, there's something wrong with this person. And if you're in the basketball game, everybody's shouting and cheering and rooting, and you're kind of, got your head down, and what's wrong with this person? The culture is that strong. Now, in action learning, we create the most powerful culture in the world. Most powerful group culture in the world. I said I can take any group, anywhere, old, new group, whatever, and I changed its culture. Because I changed the norm. I changed the language. The most powerful, positive group norm in the world. Statements can be made only in response to questions. That's a clear, powerful norm. The action learning coach, one of his or her jobs is to ensure that people are asking and answering questions. And that changes everything because it brings out the best of each individual globally. It brings out the best of every group. You start creating relationships. Start making changes. So the way you change behavior, and those of you who are in management here and so forth, you've heard of structuration theory and Giddens and so forth. It's hard to change individuals' behavior. They've had that personality for 30, 50, 75 years. But if I can change the structure, the culture, I'll change that person's behavior as long as he or she is in that structure. When they go back home, they'll treat their wife a different way than they may treat women here. But as long as they're working in my action learning group, everybody behaves this way because that's the culture. When they go outside the door, they behave differently. My hope is that this has been a wonderful experience, so creative that they start adapting this when they are members of groups or lead groups or work in problem solving. Third is the questioning process. So initially when a problem is given to a group, our natural tendency, as I mentioned, is to start offering statements. Because we all begin a problem solving with a couple assumptions. One is that we understand the problem. And two, they all understand the same way I do. And neither of those assumptions are true. We don't understand the problem that's presented to us. We think we do. We may understand part of it. We can't understand the full problem, the root problem, if we get asked questions about it, getting clarity on it, and so forth. So we accept the fact that when a problem is presented, we don't fully understand it. We probably don't have the full problem or the real problem. We have kind of a deep sense of the urgency, the symptoms that are really hurting us. But why the problem's there, or how it got there, or what the cause is, we only can understand it through a systems approach. Asking each other, what are you touching and feeling? What are you touching and feeling? It's like the best example, I think, is the Indian fable of the 7 blind men and the elephant. Everybody familiar with that? You know, most are. Well, you have these 7 blind men. I'll give you an update for the few who might not be aware of it. And they're driving this Jeep through the rainforest and jungle, and they encounter an object that stops the Jeep. And so each of the blind people go out and they try to determine what is it that's preventing this Jeep from going forward. And someone says, we got a wall here. And we got just dynamite and we'll go through. And someone says, no, we got a tree. We got to chop it down and go through. And someone said, no, we got a big rope. We just got to just pull that rope and get all this stuff out of here. Each person, when you get a problem, you understand it in the way in which you touch and feel it, your life experience. And you're doing the best you can. But unless you get agreement as to what the real problem is, the full problem, you're offering different strategies, right? Let's say you think it's a elephant, and I think it's a tree, and I'm offering the strategy of chopping. And you're not going to like my strategy, are you? Unless I have more power. Eventually, that's what happens in groups. They have to make a decision, and whoever has the most power, the most votes, they blast, or they chop, and none of them do the right thing. Because to do the right thing, which is gentle elephant, you lead it and you have to understand the problem, the real problem, the full problem. And diverse groups can do that because what are you touching and feeling? And then you realize you have an elephant here. And so that's why questions help you understand the problem, but also, as I said, they help you come up with creative, innovative strategies to solve it. And so, but questions do a number of things. They not only help you be creative, they get you to stay together as a team. They get you to like each other. I can assure you that all of us have, let's just recall the last time you met with your best friend, last night, a week ago, and you had a, conversation with them, hour, couple hours. What did you spend the entire hour or 2 hours doing?
Listening.
Pardon?
Listening.
You ask each other questions. You ask each other. I can assure you, friendships are built on asking questions, getting people, giving them an opportunity, helping you, or you offering to help them. What can I do? None of us have a close friend that doesn't ask questions of us, or we have of them. We may have relatives, but I can assure you, you think of who your friends are. They are people you feel comfortable in asking questions of. They feel comfortable asking you. You ask them for help, they're going to ask you for help. You look for opportunities, but you ask questions. And you can just, next time you have a conversation without embarrassing your friend or whatever, but just tell her after it's over or while you're doing it. And once you get actually, you start reflecting when you do anything. You start realizing what's going on. So questions are, because you cannot be a great problem-solving team if you don't like each other, don't respect each other. And if I start asking you a question, what do you think we should do? Or what's your ideas? How do you feel towards me? When I ask you a question, what do you think we should do here? I give you an opportunity to shine. How do you feel towards me?
Elated.
You love me. We love people who give us the opportunity to shine. We like people who, so you go show me an action learning group where people are asking, what's your idea? Have you experienced? What should we do? Why are you suggesting that? People can't even help it. I can assure you, you could have some stranger walking down the hallway here, and you start asking questions of each other. After 5 minutes, you like each other. That's the power of questions. But so it does that. It does all wonderful things. Problem solving, group cohesiveness, listening, respect, reflection, learning, and change. And let me just talk very quickly about the learning. Has anyone in this group been able to learn anything of any significance without reflecting? Can't be done, because reflection allows us to understand something, tailor it, apply it, and so forth. Next question. Has anyone in this group been able to reflect without a question? Either you addressed to yourself or someone asked you. Anyone? Anyone able to reflect without a question? So, great questions always lead to great reflection. Great reflection always leads to great learning. And great learning always leads to great actions. So action learning, instead of working, well, let's go to the actions. You're always very narrow, short. You never get creativity. You never build a great team that likes each other. You look for great questions. Because I can assure any group, the greater the question, the greater will be the reflection, liking each other. The greater the reflection, the greater the learning, and the greater the learning, the greater strategies that emerge. Because you can't develop strategies without learning. Otherwise you're just repeating the old ones. And you cannot reflect without questions. So you see the reason why I got the ground rule? All the powerful things that questions do. Fourth element, you've got to get action. Action is not only us doing physical things, or talking to people, or buying things. Actions are decisions too. As you're solving a problem, you're making decisions. You're creating alternatives, selecting alternatives. You're identifying who's going to do what between now and the next time we meet, or what we're going to do between now and the end of this meeting. So you have to get actions. And we look for holistic problem solving, great goals, and strong commitment that people take action at every session, and the organization takes the actions that the group came up with. So I think all of you may be, many of VCU graduates here or current students, aware of the difference between holistic thinking and reductionist thinking. Most of us, when we're in a situation, we try to isolate the situation and then try to solve that isolated problem or connect this isolated strategy to that situation. It never works. But that's the natural thing. Although we're born as systems thinkers, Eastern cultures perhaps are better systems thinkers than Western. As an individual, it's hard to do systems thinking, so we tend to use linear thinking or Newtonian kind of thinking. In problem solving, we have to kind of do systems and see the whole picture and so forth. So you only get that through questions. You have to use not only analytical skills, you have to be intuitive. You got to be creative. And so action learning kind of tends to do on your left-hand side. We can't solve the problem unless we understand the context. We can't just offer strategy without realizing the impact of the strategies not only on this group of people or situation, it's going to impact the whole organization. Everything creates waves, circles of impact. So action learning does holistic problem solving. Second, in action learning, we get great goals. We talk about how the problem creates urgency, but you want inspirational goals. You want great goals. Now, my daughter is a 4th grade teacher. And let's say she had a problem. One of her students was acting up, being a difficult person. Wasn't learning very much and just hurting the classroom atmosphere and so forth. So that's her problem. And her goal is, how can I get this student to perform better, to behave better, right? So she has lots of strategies. I'll spend time with her parents, work with other teachers with her, change some of the ground rules in the classroom so that everybody has to, do this. And so after a month or so, she gets this student to behave and perform better. What do you think's happened to the other 24 students in her class? They've gone chaos because they demand attention to get this. It's the wrong goal. And so your goals determine your creativity and understanding the system and changing the system rather than changing one element. So what would be a great goal for my daughter who has this fourth grader who is a pain in the neck? Yeah. How can I make this a great learning environment for all 25 of my children? You see how that becomes more inspirational? But look at more opportunities for strategies. You can use other parents. You can use the children helping each other, people in the class. You can make this an exciting hall. That's the importance of the goals you set. Oftentimes we're confined, well, here's the problem. But actually, not only, because as she asked about the problem enough, she would realize you cannot change one person. You got to change the system. You got to change the structure, the culture. Otherwise, it can't be changed. So, now, in action learning, we always get actions. So there's 3 questions that are necessary to get an action on any kind of problem or achieve any goal. Who knows, who cares, who can? You gotta know where the power is, where the passion is, where the knowledge is. And every problem, every goal, because I have the right strategy, but I don't have enough power, or I got power, but I don't have any passion for it. I could be the CEO. I could create some passion for it. So in action learning, the learning group, not only when they solve the problem, as they're solving, saying, what are the actions we're going to take? Where's the power in the organization? How do we build passion around this idea? So to take action requires action at the end of every session. Everybody takes action. You test ideas, see if they're really practical and they work. If you just make recommendations, people don't feel like there's enough. We put all this energy, all we do is write recommendations no one uses. Now, oftentimes the action learning group, their responsibility is to provide recommendations to the organization, and the organization implements the actions with some of their members as well as people maybe throughout the world in their organization. But they have to know that actions are going to be taken with their recommendations. And the commitment is made by the corporate sponsor, the problem presenter, that these actions are the ones they're going to take. Sometimes the group, actually takes the actions as well as develops the strategies. So depending upon, and the action learning group knows it up front. Are we going to have to raise sales by 10% in this organization, or are we just developing the strategies that will cause the organization to raise 10%? Fifth, as I said, a component is that everybody in a group is recognize they have to not only learn, they got to help everyone else in the group learn. So if I'm working on my leadership skill of being creative, and you're working on the leadership skill of being a listener, and you're working on leadership skill of being decisive, I've got to help you develop your leadership skills as well as develop my own. So everybody's saying, yes?
Do you ask team members to disclose their goals for their learning objectives, their individual learning objectives? Is that part of the...
They have a leadership goal, because every leadership skill will help the problem solving, will help the team. They don't have, that's why we focus on leadership. And I don't care whether I'm working with social workers or teachers, or working with a receptionist. Receptionists can develop leadership skills to do their job better. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Or okay. Okay, good. Okay, so but everybody identifies, and the way we work it is that at the beginning of the session, we identify, here's the ground rule, here's my role as a learning coach, and we're here to develop your leadership skills because that will help us solve the problem, work better as a team, and you'll be able to apply this through the rest of your life, inside and outside your organization. And action learning does change people for the rest of their lives. For many people, after an hour, they have that skill that they've been working on, and now they have it deeply. So at the beginning of the session, I ask each person, what's the leadership skill you want to practice and develop during this session? So everybody puts their leadership skill up there. And then I say, at the end of the session, I'm going to ask you how you did on your leadership skill. And I'm going to ask the other members of the group to give you examples of how you practice that leadership skill. You see the intensity? None of us want to fail, so we want to be sure. But our subconscious is working so strong that we start using words and behaving in a way we've never done before. And everybody practices the leadership skill they put up there, even though it's a difficult one that they normally aren't very good at. But to develop a skill, 4 elements are necessary to develop a skill. And only action learning does it. And I don't care whether it's a teaching skill or social work skill or whatever. A skill requires 4 elements. What are they? You want to become a better swimmer, or you want to become a better leader, or a better parent? Pardon? Practice. Okay, one thing, you cannot develop a skill without practicing it. When you are working with a group of people trying to solve a problem in which you don't already have the answer, every leadership skill can be practiced. And only in that environment, in which a group of people are trying to solve a problem, can every leadership skill be practiced. I can be in my office for months and not practice certain skills because there's no occasion to practice it. But in an action learning group, every skill can be practiced every session. So that's one element to develop a skill. What else is necessary to develop a skill?
Desire.
A desire. It has to be important to you. What leadership skill do you want to develop? Or what leadership skill is your boss saying you better develop, and so forth. So you cannot develop a skill unless you want to do it. It's important to you. You need it for your success or survival. Third, yeah?
You need to identify the skill.
You have to?
Identify the skill.
Well, yeah, I'm assuming this is what I desire, it's a skill. I may help in saying, well, what do you mean by that skill? So because it has to be observable, clear, and so forth. So I have a skill, I practice it. What else do I need to develop that skill? Pardon?
Somebody to model the skill.
Well, no one can model the skill for you. And it could, distract us. It'd be a way of teaching you how to act rather than acting your way to learning. To go to Cynthia.
Demonstrate.
You have to get feedback from other people. We'd be better parents if our children would give us a little feedback on how we're parenting. Or students would give us feedback on how we're doing. But golf, I play golf, it's the golf pro say, or your partner say, here's what you could do. You got to get feedback. That's the third element, develop a skill. And you really be good at a skill. A master. What's the fourth element? Self-reflection. You have to be able to determine for yourself, am I teaching a good class? Because you got to be able to do it on the spot after it's over without getting feedback. And everything you do, you can self-reflect. You're not dependent upon feedback, but obviously in action learning you see the model I've demonstrated to you, you get all 4 elements. Important, desirable for you, practice, feedback, and I ask you first, how did you do over the last 40 minutes or 2 hours? And you have to give me, and our subconscious can do many things we never think it can. So, well, how can I be reflecting and developing leadership skills when I'm working on a problem? Our subconscious does much more work than our consciousnesses. And action learning uses subconscious much more than conscious, particularly in learning, because that's how children learn, through their subconscious, not conscious. Well, here's the word, here's the vocabulary, here's the grammar, here's the movement. It becomes part of them. So we have time, and then we leverage the learning. So anything we learn, the last question in an action learning session is, what have we learned here at this session that you can apply in your organization, in your life? And everybody writes down, and we share it. Because that's where you get real leverage. Because some great skill or some great idea we can apply hundreds of times the rest of our life. And that's the power and benefit of it. Okay, then we learn quickly because we learn like children learn. We just learn naturally. It's part of it. And everything, and we learn from the experience. So learning is kind of existing knowledge we bring into the group. And then as we work on the problem and through our questions, we add knowledge and reflection. We keep adding more and more knowledge and skills through it just occurs. And I only probably capture 10 or 15% of the learnings that have occurred. Because, we move along. We got to move quickly. People got to be out of the room in 60 minutes or whatever the case may be. But I leave their questions in their mind, the experience that they reflect on, they keep on learning. And I might say at the next session, you're working on the leadership skill of being decisive. At the next session, the first question I ask you, how have you practiced decisiveness? And what was the impact of that over the 30 days since this last action learning session? Do you think you're going to probably practice that skill a couple times and you're going to see the impact of it and natural. So the action learning builds it so it's a lifelong. Learning never stops, particularly if it gets exciting and important in our mind. So, as I say, it talks about how you develop any skill, learn how to learn, alter beliefs, values, basic assumptions. And then the learning coach makes sure that every group gets action at the end of every session. There's learning, individual, group, organizational learning. That it's deep learning, and it's applicable learning. So the coach makes sure this is a group and that it's learning, making great actions, and if there's any dysfunctional behavior, anybody attacks anybody or does something that discourages the learning or the actions, the coach comes in and makes the learning opportunity so the group and individual can handle that behavior in the future and not let it destroy groups. Because we know one of the most powerful things for a coach is that it keeps groups performing at a high level. They don't go through storming. They highly perform at the beginning and stay that way. So typically, however, a group, when they form, after a little while, sometimes the first 10 minutes, sometimes hour 1 or 2, they start storming. And someone attacks someone else, or ridicules someone else, or rolls their eyes, or don't pay attention, or pulls their phone out when someone's talking. So, you have this person in the group who's responsible for the group being a high-performing team, helping individuals learn and the group learn. So the coach observes this interaction or something that's been going on for a little bit of time. It's a learning opportunity, right? So, and coaches are skilled. We have a certification program and you get skilled and handle these situations. But you can see the benefit. If you get this to not happen again, people like each other, it's worth a wonderful life in that group and the results, and you get things done in half the time or 1/100th the time. So the coach has a very simple formula. It's the way you change your children's behavior. Or anything you're trying to change behavior by somewhat changing the structure and changing the norms and so forth. So the coach, who has the power to intervene whenever he or she sees an opportunity to help the group perform, right? You agree to that. When we started this action learning session, you agreed that understood my role to be to help improve the performance of the group. And I'll occasionally intervene when I see a learning opportunity or a way for the group to be successful. And be sure we get both action and learning at the end of the session, if not during. So I've given myself the power, authority, and right. If I don't have, even if I'm a CEO of the company, I say, you two stop it. Doesn't make me look very good because that's not my role to be. I'm there to help get to action. Only a person responsible for learning can handle dysfunction because it's not related to the task. So the learning coach just simply says, I'm observing, I never mention names because it's very emotional, I'm observing that someone has attacked someone else. Or two people are doing X and Y. I make the observation. And then I said, what's the impact on a group? Not this group, but any group. What's the impact on a group when this behavior occurs? We lose energy. We want to go home. We don't want to do this. We stay away. What else? I get all the impact of that behavior. And then I said, what could a group do to prevent that from occurring in the future, or ways we could handle that in the future? And the group develops a number of norms. Okay, we won't do this. We'll focus on the task. We won't treat people this way. We're going to agree to be on time. Won't take our phone. Whatever the case might be. And then I say, who has the next question? I'm in. I'm out. I've never had a dysfunction occur a second time. So that's impossible. No, it's not, because the group has set norms. It's now a different part of the church, or and people have learned how to handle it. So if someone does that behavior, a member of the group will step in. Remember we agreed that we wouldn't do that here? People get the power. Can I help the group handle dysfunctional behavior? Everything I do is to give the power to the group. I never make a statement. Let me put it this way. I never close my mouth without a question. I make an observation. I'm observing the two people are fighting. What's the impact? I never close my mouth without a question. And I never make a judgment. Never make a judgment. I say I'm observing something everybody else is observing. And I try to keep it as dispassionate as possible because these things are harmful. But I have to be courageous because the CEO may be the one who's treating someone that way. And no one gets hurt in my groups. I'll take the arrows. But I have to demonstrate great leadership. I have to be very courageous. We all kind of know what's right and wrong, but we have to have leadership skills and courage to do it. And so that's the power of the coach, that my group always, you know, they might initially say, well, this guy is pretty tough on us, but they love me because they see this group is really performing. They're enjoying it. We were with this group for the last 3 years, and we hated each other, and now we're having fun. I had one person say, no, I worked with this lady for 10 years. And this is the first group we've been in and we both got along. 10 years. Had another person say, I've been in the Navy for 25 years. And this is the first group that performed, and I enjoyed being a part of it. Question?
Can you talk a little bit in this section about the rotating role of action on coach? I'm just really interested.
The rotating role of the coach?
Yeah, how that
Okay.
plays out.
Ideally, it's good to have someone be the coach for the whole group, external to the group. Because other group members, they don't want to be involved in the problem. They want to pull themselves out from the action during that session. So organizations have a variety. They can trade coach one section to another, or they get, a professional certified coach or consultant. Just like you're working on a tax problem, you bring a tax person in. What's more important in the organization than learning how to be leaders and solve the most important complex problems? So ideally, you identify the person. Now, the person always has to be identified before the group begins working. So if it's going to rotate, this session I'm the coach. Everybody knows my role. And then when I come in, people can accept me playing the roles and getting people to learn and so forth. So you have to know it up front. Some organizations or groups rotate. It's very difficult to do both things at the same time, to be an active group member and a coach. But we know in academic circles we sometimes force people to do it that way. But when I work with an organization, I work on, these billion-dollar projects with VPs and so forth. Paying me some good bucks is worth, working on a multi-million-dollar project. What's a few $1,000s for someone to get this group to be effective on it. So it's worth that effort. Now, sometimes as students, we got to say, okay, we've only got our half hour in the class, we got to work on a paper or a project or a delivery. So you work it out. Say, okay, tonight I'm the coach. We'll continue working the group. So I have to assume the responsibility of the coach. That's more important than anything else. I have to manage the time that we get both action and learning, because the group will say we don't have time for learning unless you assert your authority. And you have your question. We have a script. Here's what you started with. Here's some questions at the beginning. Here's some questions at the end. And so, but someone has to be designated coach. You cannot say, well, we're now a mature group. We don't need a coach. You go outside the room. What was a church now becomes a basketball game. And the way the group interacts and communicates with each other. Just because every question I ask as a coach goes deep into the conscious and subconscious of each person. And as long as I'm sitting there, those questions keep reverberating in their mind, even though I'm not asking them anymore. I like to consider myself being an angel among humans. So if you had an angel in your group asking questions, they would really think, well, this is really a deep question to reflect on. And when I get involved in working on the problem, my questions have less power. It can be done. So the ideal is to get someone who can do it. Now, you're in class, let's rotate. You help our group, and we'll have someone help your group, and you can rotate. The person doesn't have to be the same coach for each session, but if the coach is also working on the problem, you have some of those challenges. Okay. So the coach has a number of questions, get the people to come up with great understanding of problem, actions, individual learning, group learning, organizational learning. And I said the reason action learning works is it's built upon many different theories. We're all familiar with the various schools of learning. Behavioral learning, you see a lot of behavioralism. Cognitive learning, decision-making, creativity. Humanistic learning, constructivist learning, social learning, all those things. It uses all the schools of psychology. It uses physics, it uses mathematics, it uses economic theory, political theory, All those things are what make it so powerful. And just like the electron is the essence of the physical universe, the question is the essence of the social universe. And you can use questions to understand the physical universe as well. So the benefits, I'll go through each of them quickly. It's the best way to develop leaders. It's really the only way to develop leaders. They can come to George Washington University or VCU or go to a corporate training program or do outdoor adventures, whatever it would be. Only people working in problem-solving groups in which they have to demonstrate leadership skills do you get all the leadership skills developed. And I say I've had people working on skills for months or years. After a day, they want to put another leadership skill up there for tomorrow because this one they got now. They've been working on it for years. Now I've got it. And the group gave examples of how they got it. So every leadership competency can be developed. Opportunity for self-reflection involves supportive feedback. The interesting phenomenon in how it works is that I tell the individuals, I say at the end of the session, I'm going to ask you how you did in your leadership skill. And I'm going to ask other members of the group to give you examples of how you demonstrate your leadership skill. You hear what I just said? 99% of people do not hear that. Because what did I say? Did I say they were good feedback on how they did? Because people are afraid they're going to get negative feedback. Examples of what they didn't do and really put them down. But what I said is examples of how you demonstrated your successes. And at the end of the session, I'll go to this lady and say, what are some examples of how she demonstrated her leadership skill? And as a coach, I also have a few examples myself. Because they all will demonstrate at least 2 or 3 times the leadership skill. Because their subconscious is working so hard, they're afraid that they're going to get negative feedback, even though the coach would never allow that. And you can see I did not say, I'm going to ask you to give examples, give feedback. I don't use the term feedback. I'm going to ask each of you for examples of how this person demonstrated the leadership skill that she's put on the board.
Is not successful with that skill, do you just not address it, or do you?
How do you address everyone? There's only one way they cannot be successful. They don't want it. They never intended to. Because it's impossible to work with a group for more than 30 minutes in solving a problem without that skill. And the way it is, every question you ask one question during 30 minutes, you've demonstrated your skill. I don't know when and where or how you're going to use the question, but I can assure you, the system is set up, you ask one question, you're going to demonstrate whatever skill you have up there. And if you listen to what's being asked and answer one question, you're going to demonstrate that skill. That's I say, well, how can I'm trying to work on, say, creativity, right? How can I demonstrate creativity with one question? Well, if you ask a good question in the group, you get them all to be creative or understand something they did not before. And everybody's trying to help each other. You know, I don't help you because I want you to help me later on. But the coach is always writing an example. But there would be occasions where someone is like this and never participated. But that doesn't happen when I'm a coach because we deal with that in a lot of ways. Because I deal with the issue of what can we do better as a group. Well, so-and-so is not participating. So what could you do to get him to participate? I never put the responsibility on the individual. You've got an idea. You should be the leader. You can't expect other people to do what you think they should do. You've got to take leadership and help them to do it. So every leadership skill can be practiced. They don't believe it sometimes or see it, and usually what happens, I'll assure you this happens at least 50% of the time. I ask the person, how did you do in your leadership skill? And the person says, didn't do very well. I didn't do it. And I turn to the group. Oh yes, you did this, you did that, you did that. So I go back. Do you see what you did, how it did demonstrate your leadership skill? We don't realize that we motivate someone by asking them an interesting question. We don't show patience. We don't realize we're showing patience by just listening and answering only what's being asked. We start recognizing that these skills, a lot of these leadership skills can be practiced simultaneously. But can you think of any leadership skill that cannot be demonstrated by a great question? Asking the group a great question related to the project you're on. Can you think of any leadership skill that cannot be demonstrated by a great question. Initially, the questions are not so good, but they get better and better because just like riding that bike within 20 or 30 minutes, your questions get better. Every group, the questions get better and better. By the end of the session, I say, geez. I also asked the group after the first session, now if we were to bring in another problem from an outside person, do you think we'd be better and faster? Oh, yeah, we would. You know, now we know how to work. We've learned how to work. And we've learned how to learn. Second, it helps you solve problems, because that's what life is about. Whether it's how to get our child to be motivated, or a neighbor to cut their tree down, whatever the case may be. You know, there's all these challenges around us. That's okay. When the world is perfect, there's no problem. But I don't know of any neighborhood or any community or any school in which... So, problems, but we generally avoid them because we don't solve them very well, or while we're solving, we cause all kinds of friction. But if problems were greatly and innovatively solved, and we had a lot of fun doing it, and we got better and better, we wouldn't be so worried about it. But we have to learn the skills of solving problems, which is somewhat the systems thinking, seeing the big picture as well as the micro picture, and a number of different things. Getting creative, getting insights. Again, I always work with the subconscious. This is the behavioralism. I say that we're going to be working on action learning, and we're going to be looking for breakthrough problem solving, or some great ideas to solve this particular problem. I put it in everybody's subconscious. They don't hear it or remember it, but I make sure the words I use, because any word I use as a coach goes deep inside your subconscious. Even though you're not aware of it, I intentionally planted it in there. And so I say, you know, we're looking for great strategies. I have no doubt. I have confidence. I believe it will work because I have all the systems set up, all the conditions. Systems thinking. When you ask people about a problem which there's no known solution, you really aren't sure you have the right problem, you've got to understand it from a variety of perspectives. You always get a systems and a creative approach. And you not only understand the problem, you identify. You never have enough time or resources, so you have to get the most powerful strategy and lever that, you know, you can change the whole world. Our communities, I think, said you could lift the world if you had a long enough lever. And we all know that there's been some great problems solved with one great idea. Einstein did a number of them. But there's other people looking at organizations that have been greatly successful. How one great idea changed everything. Build great teams. Well, action learning teams achieve people. A team cannot be successful unless it achieves three purposes, three goals, I guess. One, it's not a great team unless it achieves its goal. It solves the problem. It accomplishes purpose. Two, we don't consider it a great team unless we've enjoyed working with each other. Wouldn't mind continuing to work with you. They enjoy working, they're effective. And three, they get better and smarter. That's the criteria of a great team. And every action learning group meets those criteria. What makes great teams is that as Reggie Evans called, we're comrades in adversity. You know, we got to solve this together, otherwise we hang separately. We got this problem the organization's given us. We need to do it together. Accountability on real problems builds strong teams. Questions, shared learning builds the relationships. The process builds teams. Working on agreed to problems, develop cleanness of tasks, strong communication and commitment. And then we change organizations. Early in my academic career, I did a lot of research and work on learning organizations. I was a disciple of Peter Senge, trying how do you build learning organizations. And I, like Peter Senge, never built a learning organization. Our theories couldn't do it. He only provided 5 skills, and that doesn't build a learning organization. So I developed different other models. But I realized that the way you build a learning organization is you build a learning culture. Because it's too complex, too many people. You build the culture so that when anyone goes in or outside that door, once they're in the door, they're in a learning culture, and then everything else falls from that. How they work in teams, individually, as a leader, or a follower, whatever the case may be. And so an action learning group is a perfect mini learning organization. Every learning leads to action. There should be, anything that you can learn can be applied, and every action you take you can learn from. Okay, so with that, I'm hoping we have time for, I guess, 5 minutes or so for questions. So if there's any questions anyone has, this is your opportunity. Yes?
You begin your meeting and you're giving people an opportunity to say, I want to exert this leadership skill. I want to model this leadership skill. Do you give them a list to pick from? I mean, how do they decide how to come up with that skill they're going to work for?
Yeah, that's always a choice the coach makes for the organization. If I put a list of leadership skills or suggest it, those are the ones that people take. If I don't put something up there, I go around and say, I can't think of a leadership skill. You know, I can't think of any. You know, even though they've been involved in this business, they've been a leader for 20 years, they can't think of a leadership skill. So if I work in an organization, I say, what are the leadership skills? Even in organizations, many organizations, I ask, what are the leadership skills? They don't have any. It could be a large corporation, you know, with 100,000 people. They don't have leadership skills that they think are important. Or if they do, no one knows about them. So oftentimes when I say we're going to be putting our leadership skills out there, what are examples of some leadership skills that are important here? And we get some, and I try to get as many as I can, because otherwise I put 3 up there, there was only 3 that people choose. You want as many different choices as you can, because the more leadership skills are practiced, the better the problem solving. Yeah.
I think about groups that I've been involved in for a while and how to get them to this kind of environment. You mentioned the questioning culture is one powerful way. Is that all it takes? Are there other ways to transform an existing group into that culture?
Well, you see, if it becomes a norm, that statements can be made only in response to questions. So then you either have to, because questions involve 2 things. First, I have to give power to people when I ask questions of them, because now and I have to listen carefully to respond only to the question being asked. Because most groups get derailed because the person doesn't listen to the question, or they answer in ways that they want to get on a soapbox and derail the group. But I can assure you, every group in which everybody's listening to the question, responding only to the question, you quickly get to a greater question, you get to see the system, you get more creative, you like each other more. So that leads to everything else, because the questioning leads to respect and listening and creativity and decisiveness and patience and respect. All those things come from questions. So all the things are necessary for a group, but you can't say, let's be patient. Let's be respectful. You can offer those, but you have to act your way into group norms. You can't give people group norms, because then they get ignored, or they're only perfunctory ones. You act your way into a great group. You act your way into a great organization. You act your way to become a great leader. Leaders don't become great until they act. Every experience they have, they become greater and greater as a leader. And they start practicing leadership maybe when the day they join the company. We recognize that as well. Okay, another question? Yeah.
What if you have a group that isn't as diverse as you would like, and you can't bring other people in?
You go where you have. I've worked with a group, they've been together for 10 years. They like each other, don't like each other. Because typically, when you make statements, you don't get diversity. But when you ask questions, you get diversity, because even though we're all engineers, some of us like to go to the Caribbean for a vacation, some like to go on the mountain. Some of us like to watch this show on TV, and others like to watch that. Some like this sport, some don't. Some had this experience in childhood, some did not. And your questions come from your whole life experience. So a group of people who kind of act and think alike, when they start asking questions, they start questioning very diversely. And so, now, if you have no engineers in your group and you're trying to solve an engineering problem, you're not going to get as far, but between sessions you get it. But you're going to get diversity in any case, but the ideal is to try to bring it in. Also, there's some concern that if you have people within the organization, you might not have the courage to challenge someone with a question because, he's my boss, but if you're an outsider, I have the example up there of the pizza man, which I've described in a couple of my books, where we had an organization which was working on a financial problem, and they had financial people working on it. And they had to prepare a proposal for the government. And the proposal was due in 48 hours, and it's Wednesday, and they got to deliver on Friday, and they're tired, they're hungry, and the boss, one of my students, says to the group, let's work a little bit longer this evening so we get it done by Friday. And so let's order pizza and get a drink and so forth. So the group said, fine. And the pizza man came in, and my student said, you know, Mike said we should have diversity in the group. I don't have any diversity here. So he asked the pizza man, said, can you join us? You know, I'll give you a big tip. I'll get you released from your boss for an hour. And all you got to do is ask questions. And so now you can see, imagine how the other group members felt about this thing. Geez, we got 48 hours, and you have him work late, and he brings in the pizza man. But, you know, he's the boss. He will let him try this out. And so the pizza man joins the group, and they continue to work, and they're drawing, you know, pie charts or arrows and developing. And after about 10, 15 minutes, the pizza man, he knows a little bit about finance, doesn't he? He's got a family budget, and he's got to deliver things. He works. I mean, he knows numbers. They all, you know, he's not an expert in finance, but so he just, after a while, he said, why is the arrow going from point A to point F? And the person who drew the arrow, in a very expertise way and authoritative way, said for reason 1 and 2. And some other expert in the group said, well, can we use it for reason 3? And the person said, well, if we use reason 3, we could go from B to F, couldn't we? Yeah, I guess we could. And the group started realizing that they had not challenged each other. They made assumptions that when everyone saw that arrow going from A to F, they all assumed that it was for this reason. Or if they didn't know, would they ask? You're with a group of fellow experts you work with, and the group is coming up with some diagram or strategy that you don't think is going to work, but everyone else around the table who are your professional experts, are you going to raise the question? This experiment has been demonstrated thousands of times and occurs every day in organizations around the world. We don't ask, why not? If you have a doubt, you know, the thing with this idea, this Titanic idea, unsinkable ship, I don't think it's going to work. But everyone, all the engineers who I work with, who I have great respect for, no one's expressing a doubt. Something wrong with me. So we never ever ask a question. And because we don't, you know, the Titanic, 1,400 people lost their lives. Because the captain was told it was an unsinkable ship. He didn't have to worry about going through the icebergs. Didn't worry about lifeboats. It's a lot easier. If I were in that Titanic engineering design group, I could have said, well, is there such a thing as an unsinkable ship? And that question would have been answered by everyone in that group, as later shown. They would have said no. But no one asked that question. And so the benefit of diversity tied to creativity, it also gives people, you know, challenge each other, particularly the expert or obnoxious one in the group gets, you know, hit by someone who has different expertise. Yeah, question here?
Your experience here. Are there pros or cons for having the boss, the CEO, the leader, whoever may be the learning coach? Based on what you've seen, is there any value to that, or do you want to make sure that doesn't?
A lot of bosses would like to be the action learning coaches. But they'd have a difficult time restraining themselves from getting involved because they have a stake in the actions. So, you know, if I'm screening, I say, well, you know, you cannot be engaged in either deceitfully or, you know, silently or manipulatively to kind of get the, you have to do it fully. And if you have the time to be available, you might want to be in a group and demonstrate good leadership skills and ask questions and have someone else be the coach. Get another one of your colleagues who's a chair of another, you know, section of the program. So, but there are many senior people who are coaches, but they coach other groups. Yeah. And it's difficult. And then if you have in your group the boss, like in Korea, you know, the boss knows everything. You never disagree with the boss. And so the Koreans use action learning probably more than any culture now. And they had to deal with the issue, well, when the boss is there, everybody waits for the boss to speak. You know, what does he want? What do you think the right answer? And so I have the boss, after the boss introduced me in a few moments, he would describe action learning. He said, now normally, we got a big problem here to solve. And normally, you wait for me to give you the answers, but this is a problem that's very difficult. We need creative energy from all of us. So I'm going to ask questions. You ask me questions. Everybody understand? 5 minutes, they're asking questions to their boss. But the boss has to be clearly known. That's where the coach has to step in. If the boss doesn't practice the ground rule, you got to step in right away. You can't allow the boss to say, well, and I don't want to challenge him. I need this, job inside the organization, whatever it would be. You've got to do the right thing. Leaders always do the right thing. Yep, a couple more questions, yeah.
One of the things I was wondering is, what if you've got a group that's been doing this action learning and now you've hired somebody new that's going to join this group? Or are there better strategies for integrating somebody new to the group?
Every group is new if it has a new problem or a new person. So this group has been working for 3 years on different projects. One person left another. They become a group when they work on a problem together. You never become a member of the group by saying, here I am, I want to be with you and I'll be a good guy, that kind of thing. Groups get formed by jointly, collaboratively solving a difficult problem together. So a new person comes in, if they have a problem the first day, by the end of the first day that person's fully in a group. And they know the person's personality and character very well.
So you have to, but you still have to explain. The coach, I guess.
Oh yeah, sure. I might meet with this person in advance. But even at the beginning of every session, even if I worked with them, people, the culture is different in here. So I said, what's the ground rule? Ask questions. What's my role? We have a new person joining. Explain the ground rule to him. Explain my role. Okay, good. You understand it? Good. Let's go. You act your way into it. Yeah.
I'm really stuck on that storming part.
Yep.
I really enjoy watching how, and you just talked about adding someone to a team. I really like watching how it changes people's personality, the parts of their personality they voiced out in a group, depending on who's in the group and the type of personalities. Yeah. So I'm having a hard time understanding the difference between that part of where you're developing your personality for that team and storming, and how you recognize when it's time to draw the line and call.
Right. Well, storming of ideas is fine. We're not talking about storming of ideas. We're talking about where people's personalities, people are trying to assert their power or not being courageous enough to participate or ask. They're not doing their job as being a leader of the group, because everyone has to serve as a leader in some capacity or another. But their whole life, their whole mentoring, their whole modeling, and what they've been told, all of you have been told, we have to storm. Because if we don't storm, we're never going to get to performing. It's a required step. That's what we're all told. And so you do what's expected. That research was done with white male behavioral psychologists in the 1960s that developed this norming, forming, forming, storming, norming, performing. Most female groups do not go through that if they don't expect to. But all groups, when they form, they have to kind of develop the norms. That's why in action learning, so most groups have to go. They form, and they got to figure out how to work. And as they figure out how to work, they can be given some instructions, but that's never enough. They have to figure it out among themselves. So they storm their way into how we're going to work. And sometimes the storming is so terrible, the group never recovers. The norms are so low, just keep your mouth closed, don't do this. And norms determine performance, as I said. But an action learning group uses a different cycle. What's the first stage of an action learning group? Norming. Before they arrive in the room, the norms are present. They exist for all of eternity as far as I'm concerned. And you're informed. This is the norm. Most powerful positive norm in the world. It then affects everything else. And it quickly prevents storming, but there's a little bit the coach comes in. But most storming is totally gotten rid of with that norm. So the norm is right away. And then what's the next step? Performing. Now, let me just kind of show how all groups tend to work. Let's say on a scale of 100 to 0. Okay? So groups that come together, let's say for charity's sake, they're at the scale of 10. They come in on a scale of 10. And then they start working together and they storm. And they eventually start working, performing at a level 5. Or less, you know. Action learning group, because of its very powerful norm, maybe it starts at 20. right off the bat. But the group keeps improving. And how does the group learn? How does it improve? Because learning determines performance. So how does the group learn to work at a 30, 40, 50, 70 degree level? It has to learn. And the coach asks a very simple question. What can we do better? Group identifies what can do better. It moves up. Next time they meet, what are we doing well? What can we do better? You cannot improve something, whether it's golf or parenting or tennis or whatever, unless you either intentionally or subconsciously saying, how can I improve this? So, action learning groups, I say they're working at maybe an 80, and most groups are working at 1. If I can give them, most groups are dysfunctional and frustrating. And I say even a group like Microsoft saying we get done more in 2 hours in 2 months. And these are not lazy, unintelligent people.
How can you get a gig at Congress? You need to like.
Pardon?
You need a gig at Congress. You need to like get in there.
The norm, you start with the norm. You change the structure and the norms. You don't try to change individual behavior. You never can succeed. Whether I'm a leader, the way I change my people so they're more productive and work better together, I change the norms and the structure. I don't try to change this person's personality. It can't be done. And personalities are okay. They're all adjustable. And we know people who are terrible people. They're obnoxious. And they tell me, Mike, action learning won't work here with this guy because he's such a terrible person. And he's going to destroy our group. I said, bring him in. Never, and then, see what happened to him? He was just he's never acted that way before. He was a nice, friendly, open guy. Happens every time. The most obnoxious people. Because this is the culture. We know that people who are serial killers, their mother thinks they're saints. Because the culture. Okay, one more question before my voice gives out.
So it seems really essential, the role of a skilled coach in practicing this form of action learning.
Right, just like a skilled leader. You can imagine you've got a great leader, what a great leader does versus a poor leader in an organization, or a great teacher versus a poor teacher. But the learning coach is a systems thing, has much greater power than the CEO does. I can change the organization much more than the CEO can. And I can change the learning much more than a teacher can, or how people change. But yes, the skill in anything. A great swimming instructor can help people learn how to swim pretty quick, and others, I happen to ski. I remember the first time I got instructed in skiing, it was disaster. But next time I got a real good one, and things happen quickly. Okay, thank you all very much. I'll turn it.